speaking to so many people can kind of bias my questions or what I'm looking for. So I definitely have to maintain that beginner's mindset or think of every conversation as the first conversation, because it is helpful to, I think, just naturally steer a little bit, but it's important to remain present and open and let the conversation go where it's going to go.
On this episode of The Claw, I speak with Jojo Bowling. She is both on the user experience and design side of Liger, and we talk primarily about what does it mean to get to know your customers and why is that important both to your marketing messages and to the products and services that you're deploying. Your assumptions about your customers are probably wrong, and you need to be okay with that. Tune in to find out why. Welcome to The Claw, the marketing podcast for C-suite executives. I'm Eric Holtzclaw, Chief Strategist at Liger Partners, and I am joined today by a fellow Liger, Jojo Bowling. She works sort of on two sides of the house at Liger. She's both on our creative and design side. She also works on our research, user experience, user interface side as well. So we're going to focus a little bit more on the user research and user experience and talk today about how you can learn about your customers in a better way. So thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into that, so of course I said that's what we're going to do, but you're on kind of both sides. So tell me a little bit about that journey. Like, how did you end up being a designer with an interest in, the user experience and research side?
So I guess to put it in my mom's words, I've always been the designated passenger in the Uber. So I was always the person who was up there making conversation. So just a very natural thing for me as far as understanding people, talking to them. And then as far as design goes, I just enjoy creating. I think creativity is what drives me. And to put it in a logistical speak, I did go to school for UX design, but then I worked in marketing. So I decided to fuse those, and that's how I ended up here.
Yeah, and that's a really smart. I mean, that's one of the problems is that people put marketing together and they don't know who they're marketing to. So
Absolutely.
There's these conversations being had in boardrooms about great ideas, which are great, but if they don't really resonate with your end customer, you don't have the right messaging, then they're going to fall flat.
Yeah, and so in marketing, we did work with heat maps or understanding our customers' demographics, but I think the thing in research is taking it a step further and understanding, okay, what does that mean in a way that might not benefit me? Right. What are the pain points outside of just the marketing aspect, I suppose?
Oh, so meaning that, like, if I love the marketing campaign but my customers don't, then it may not really be a great campaign.
It might not resonate.
No, it's so sad.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like that idea of, being the passenger who likes to ask questions. You have to be naturally curious to be in that space. I've always liked it really for a different reason. And maybe it's natural curiosity, but I always want to know why people do what they do.
100%.
Deeply understand, like, why did you make that decision? Like, what from your past, what thing made you, and they never know. Like, really, right. They don't know that they've made the decision based on that.
I agree. And I think why is the biggest buzzword in research. And I think a lot of researchers you talk to, or even UX designers, they'll say that is their favorite word.
Yeah. So I told you right before the interview, I had a book come out in 2013, and it was the same time Simon Sinek. Yeah, he's always,
I love Simon Sinek.
Yeah, what's your why, that type of thing.
Yes.
So he stole why from me because I was going to use it to promote the book and whatever. So I called myself Dr. Why.
Okay.
Like, the kind of behind thing. And what I do find on the why is typically people don't ask deep enough. So they say, why? Oh, well, because it was the least expensive, which is never true. Like, if somebody tells you it's about money, it's not about money.
Right.
Yeah, we can find money for things if we like them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's this idea that without asking people for specific examples, there's a tendency, it's actually a psychological phenomena where we will explain something it would be similar to someone who is like us, but not necessarily what we do.
Right.
And so asking that, well, can you tell me about the most recent, or specifically, then people will be like, oh, I actually didn't realize I did it that way. And that's a deeper dive into their why that they might not even, like you said, they might not even know.
Yeah.
So
would tell me how that would unfold. So give me an example.
Yeah. So for example, even today, I was interviewing someone and I asked them, okay, so tell me about your most recent call, for example. And they gave me the day-to-day and how they would have handled it. And I said, okay, great. Now, can you show me what you would have done? And then in the show and tell, they're like, oh, wow, I guess I didn't realize I did that. Like just this little subset. I use a sticky note versus something in my computer, for example, just the actual task that might be so minute that we don't notice. But in showing, we realize, oh, that's part of my day that I don't really pay attention to, that maybe I want to change, or maybe that's really important.
Yeah, and I may not want to. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, looking at everything outside of the product or service or interface you're creating that's really impacting that use.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the fun thing I like in research too is when you will ask somebody something and they will mirror it to someone else, but they're really talking about themselves.
Yes.
Like, well, I've got a friend and they do the following thing, and really they're talking about themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's like, that's how you do it too. You just don't want to admit it, specifically if you're in a topic that may be more sensitive.
Yeah, I would say one of the most difficult parts about research is understanding how to have, and this is in conversations in general, I think, is how can you talk to someone and remain objective, but allow them to understand that they're not being judged, that I might be asking you a question, but it's not a judgment. It's just out of curiosity or gaining insight. And I have had that come up where I have people think, oh, they'll say, I probably shouldn't do that. And I'm like, I'm not judging you.
Right.
It's not my tone. Like, you're not doing anything wrong. I'm just here to understand.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say.
Doing those research interviews, starting off in your preamble, I'm always, I'm not here to judge you. I'm just here to listen. Treat me as your therapist. You can tell me anything. I'm going to anonymize the results, so no one's going to know that it was you. And then you find, if you get them really comfortable, they tell you things that maybe they shouldn't have told you. You're like, wait.
Yeah,
I didn't say I needed to know that.
Yep. Just things can surface that are totally unexpected, and then it becomes a vent session. Or
like, I was drunk the other night, and I'm like, wait. No. We're not talking about that. How did this come up? So,
exactly. Yeah, I agree with that. And then I think too, even in conversations, it's tough to not affirm people because you don't. Some people get in this mindset of, did I give you the right answer?
Right.
And it's like, there is no right answer.
Yeah.
It's just talking.
Yeah.
And so saying, okay, or understandable, or repeating what they said rather than, great, you're doing great, that sounds right. And I think that, can allow them to open up and speak freely. But they're a little confused. They're like, am I saying the right thing? So I think that's just human nature.
Well, and we live in such a reward-based society. So one of the things that we would deal with when we would try to test for something is we couldn't number choices or even letter them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because if you would say, which choice do you like better, A, B, or C? Or do you like 1, 2, or 3? There was this tendency to go to what felt like a better number.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So we might use color codes instead or name them something.
Okay.
So then that way there wasn't a preference to the choice.
Yeah.
So it's so many little nuanced mind tricks.
Absolutely.
You have to think about.
I agree with that.
Yeah, so as you went through the, decision to kind of get into this space, what's something, that's kind of unexpected for you? Like, what's the thing that you've learned either about yourself or about doing this type of work that you didn't expect?
I think I didn't expect for it to feel so natural. And that kind of goes back to people say if you're in a role that makes a lot of sense for you, it won't feel like work.
Right.
And that's something for me. I just didn't expect it to feel very conversational, and I am genuinely interested and curious about what people are telling me. So that's one thing I didn't fully expect. Secondly, kind of flip side is speaking to so many people can kind of bias my questions or what I'm looking for. So I definitely have to maintain that beginner's mindset, or think of every conversation as the first conversation, because it is helpful to, I think, just naturally steer a little bit, but it's important to remain present and open and let the conversation go where it's going to go.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues that companies run into when they try to do their own research, is they have this bias.
Right.
And they don't know it. It's a bias towards the way they've always done it, their expectations of what customers or individuals are going to do, and they start to introduce it. And so
Right.
having a third party who may not know anything about it, I've done research projects on stuff, still don't even know what I was necessarily talking about,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
I could play the village idiot and be like, hey, explain it to me like I'm two, because I really don't know.
Yes,
Right?
I absolutely lean into that.
Yeah.
And I like that you brought up bias, because through just the past year, I've really thought about how would I define bias. And what I've come to is bias is when something feels so obvious that you wouldn't even think to question it. And I think that is a good definition because, for example, this mug is 100% one color. I see that only one color, but maybe to somebody who's colorblind, they see something different.
Yeah.
But I would never question this because it's so obvious to me.
Right.
So I think bias, like you said, just staying very open, and then playing village idiot. Like I don't know anything. Tell
Right.
me everything. I know nothing.
Right. Yeah. Pretend like I know nothing about this. Like start from the beginning and then asking the next question.
Yes.
Because that's where you miss the thing. And it's what's interesting. So I'm naturally curious, but what I like the most, if I really admitted it, is watching the patterns of the interviews occur. So where you've now interviewed so many people within a certain segment and you can predict what they're going to say next. It's like
kinda
my
freaky.
favorite. It's my favorite cocktail party trick. I'm just
Yeah.
like, you're going to say this. Oh, you did. It's amazing. I love it. Right. Because
Yeah.
then you're starting to see patterns. And that is a thing that's very, so a lot of the business owners, people who are listening to this podcast, they like concrete, they like KPIs, they like numbers, they're results driven. And when you do this type of work, you don't know what you know until you know it.
Absolutely.
So you start off and you're like, I have no idea. And then you get so long into it that you're like, okay, now I know some stuff.
Yes,
Right?
it's amazing to see that surface. And I think, going from interview 1 to interview whatever number in the sequence.
Well, the one you're in now is like 100 and something interviews.
Yeah,
It's just a few.
Absolutely, just a few. But like you said, it's just so fascinating. At a certain point, I realized, oh my gosh, I know exactly how they're going to answer this.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the patterns. And I think even in conversation, and this is where, again, I lean into curiosity or like new experiences, is that you can kind of get a read on what their mindset is based on the word choice they use. This has happened in a few conversations. I spoke with people about just general conversation, and they were bringing up terms like, oh, well, if the wind is great, then we'll follow the waves, or just nautical terms. And I was like, are you a sailor? And they're like, yeah, how did you? And because you brought up a lot of nautical terms.
Yeah.
So I think the word choice can give you a lot of clues into who you're talking to.
Yeah, it goes into their context.
Absolutely.
One of my favorite projects that we did, we were doing one with a parental controls product.
Okay.
And we were trying to determine the messaging to get parents to use this for their kids. So back, locking down their computers at a certain point or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And we could ask one question. I don't remember the question. People always ask me that, and I don't remember the question. And based on the choice, we knew what kind of parent they were.
Right.
So were they a helicopter? Were they, the one that saw their kid as a friend? Like there was like 3 ways they could go.
Absolutely.
And based on that answer, and you can translate that into marketing messages. You can translate it into the digital property. Like you're sort of subconsciously putting those in, and then they're self-selecting, and all of a sudden you're talking to them completely in that manner.
And then that your personas start to come up, and then you realize, okay, they are, and not to completely segment someone, but just generically, this is who they are. This is how I see them.
Yeah, but the thing about it is we're really not all that different. Everybody
Right.
Everybody thinks we're I'm very different, but within a context, people fall in these kind of buckets.
Yeah.
And we don't like to hear that, but it's not the buckets that maybe the world typically looks at it as. It's not your demographics. It's
Right.
not age. It's not whatever. It's more about sort of how you approach the world, how things that have happened to you in the past, like those kind of things really drive more within a specific context.
I agree. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I love personality tests.
Yeah.
I think Myers-Briggs, DISC.
Well, you were
things
telling me
that.
you like astrology too, I think, at a thing too, just recently.
Yeah.
You think that that's what we should be asking during our interviews?
It's interesting. I think we discovered yesterday there's 10 Geminis who work here.
Yeah.
So I do think it's fascinating, again, patterns, but how does that relate to a personality type or a persona? And in certain industries, you find overlap, and you
Yeah.
find this is very common or this is not at all.
Right.
But again, it's how people self-identify.
Yeah. So what I want to do is go to a commercial break, and when we get back, I want to talk a little bit about, if I'm a company and I want to get to know my customers better, how do I ask good questions? Like
Okay.
what may be examples of good questions? What may be examples of bad questions? Where do certain techniques kind of fall in? So, when would I use a survey versus maybe a qualitative approach or focus groups, which I am not a fan of. So we can talk about why I don't like focus groups. We'll talk about it in the next segment. But focus groups,
No.
I can just go on and on.
Not for you.
about-
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
focus groups. Yeah, they're
Looking forward to that.
poorly done.
Okay.
Over and over again. Terribly done.
Yeah, anytime you incentivize getting people's opinion.
Well, it's
it can
that.
be.
It's that, but it's also just even about how they're structured. So I have I have a soapbox I'll pull out.
Great.
I'll stand on it. We'll talk about focus groups, and then we'll come back. So anyway,
Okay.
we're going to the commercial break. So you're listening to The Claw, which is the marketing podcast for C-suite executives. I'm talking today with a fellow Liger, Jojo Bowling. She is truly a Liger because Liger is the combination of two things, and she works both on our design side and our user experience side. And we're talking about user experience and how to get to know your customer better. We'll be back in just a minute.
Thanks so much for watching the Claw podcast. We'll be back after this short break.
When I first met the Unicorn Marketing Agency, everything was rainbows and, well, unicorns. They promised overnight marketing results for my business, leads my sales team couldn't keep up with. Once I signed up with them, they didn't even hold up any of their promises, even after months. And the only thing they gave me were excuses. After a while, communication with them became spotty and they were hard to get a hold of. Eventually, they stopped responding altogether. Overall, I lost a total of about $23,000 over a 4-month period. And I lost a lot of valuable time and energy.
And we're back. You're listening to The Claw, the marketing podcast for C-suite executives. I'm talking today with a fellow Liger, Jojo Bowling. She is on both our design and user experience side, and we're talking primarily on the user experience side, and how that may inform design or your marketing messages. Before we went to the commercial break, I wanted to unpack in this segment a little bit about maybe some mistakes that we see companies make when they decide to go out and talk to their customers and get their feedback. So let's open that up. Like, what are some things you see companies do? I've got a whole list of them. So, but what would you say?
Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest issues or areas where you can skew the research is by approaching your customer from your perspective. So, for example, oftentimes, and this is as it relates to designing an interface. So this isn't quite research, but that is something that we do test for, is how do users interact with an interface. And another thing is I like to call users people, so I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
But anyways, so
Because
people
user could have a completely different annotation,
can,
right?
it
If you're
can.
watching Dope Sick, completely
That's right.
different one.
It's
But,
like
yeah.
the only two industries you hear users are drugs and technology. So whatever your opinions are on that.
Okay,
yeah.
that's a good point.
So I
That
would
is a
say
JoJoism.
people.
We need to put that on the social media. I like that.
Yes. So for example, you're a developer and you're creating this interface for people who are running a line in a manufacturing plant, for example. So the developer is going to build this in the way that makes sense from the developer's perspective. Where's the best place for me to push this button X, Y, and Z for me? And then if they were to go and ask a user, okay, what do you think about the placement of this button? That's a little bit too, you're focusing too much on your intent of understanding how they use your button rather than what is your opinion of this screen?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on how this feels? So rather than honing in on one specific item, because it kind of skews the research too, if they say, oh, well, I guess this is good, then okay, they like the button, but they like the way that it's yes or no. So if the button makes sense for them in that question, in that context, then yes, they're going to say they like the button, but they might not actually like the button.
Right.
So I think to summarize that, I think it's important to ask people open-ended questions and then to try to approach understanding their perspective from a completely open, like, if I don't know anything about you, what do you think about this?
Right. Yeah. Yes.
If that's not vague enough.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Okay.
and being vague, I worked with a researcher that taught me the technique of starting to ask a question, then trailing off.
Yeah.
So what you're telling me,
Fill in
and
the
then
blank.
people, and I'm the world's worst, everyone who works here knows this, can't stand dead space. So they will fill it.
It's a tendency.
Yeah, if you
It
leave
is.
dead space, then someone's going to start talking because they just can't handle it. It's like, someone has to say something.
Right. Fill in the blank, make it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, though, it's like allowing people to, a lot of people don't want to, or maybe they don't feel like they can think thoughtfully about a question.
Yeah.
So, and again, I think that can skew your research, because if people think they need to just give you the first answer off the top of their mind, that might not actually be meaningful to them. So how would you approach that in a business setting? Just let people know. Take your time. You have time to think.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. There's no rush. We have space. Think through what you want to say.
Yeah,
I want to hear what you have to say.
And that reassuring them that it's not a test.
Right.
We were running
I
one
agree.
study, and it was with a company that was going through some internal turmoil. And so we had them showing up at our offices to do the interview. And
Okay.
we were really trying to build a new interface for them. We had no idea that this internal turmoil was occurring. They thought the people who were showing up thought we were an outplacement,
Okay.
that they were being sent in to be interviewed to see which ones they were going to keep and which ones they weren't. So it was skewing the
Oh,
results
geez,
terribly. Like,
yeah.
why is everybody, because they were like giving me all these prim and proper answers. And I'm like, no, I need to know, like, tell me the dirt.
Yeah,
like, what's
the
going
down and
on,
dirty,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, you can trust me. I'm not going to tell anybody. And they're like, I can't trust you. I'm going to get fired. I was like,
Yeah.
so all those outside influences, and at work, which we talk, B2B decisions, an at work decision is way more dangerous than an at home decision, because
Right.
you can lose your income, lose your job, lose your reputation, look stupid in front of people that, so we always put on a certain mask
I agree.
when we get to work. And so when you're doing specifically B2B work, it's really important. B2C, I love to get into people's homes and cars and stuff, because they show up for an interview and they're all dressed up and whatever.
Yes.
And then you get in their house and they are a pack rat.
Oh yeah, that's like one of my favorite things to do is, just with my friends. Hey, let's see what's in your purse.
Yeah,
Pour it out.
yeah.
What's in there? Yeah, because it gives you a lot of insight into who are these people. What are they about? I always carry a deck of cards. There's like, okay, so she likes to play games, or things like that. So.
Yeah. Are these cards or tarot cards?
No, playing cards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you're in the astrology. It could be tarot cards.
It could be. That's fair.
And I'm not judging.
And maybe for some parties, and that is in my bag.
works.
But not all of it. Yeah.
We were doing one study during the financial crisis that happened like in 2008, whatever. And it was a spender saver. So you were either a spender or a saver.
Okay.
It's truth. Like, you're either a spender or a saver. Typically a spender is married to a saver. So one in the family is a spender, one is a saver.
I could see that.
Two spenders are broke. They never have a dime, right? Two savers have no fun,
Okay.
because they just save money and whatever.
Yeah.
So spender savers are good combinations. I'm the spender. the way. And we were doing, and so we went to this lady's house, and you could tell that they were like on the verge of losing the house.
Oh,
like
wow.
they didn't have a lot of their furniture. They were like, the house was just bare. And she was wearing a Rolex.
Okay.
And she had bought the Rolex with credit card reward points because she was such a spender. That was her way to manifest, I need to go spend some money.
Yes.
And so she would use her reward points to like do that, but it wasn't real money.
Okay.
So she was like, yeah, I got this Rolex. But we would never have known that. Like if she'd shown up, she would have been wearing the Rolex and then she was dressed nicely. If we hadn't gone to her home, we wouldn't have really known, they're not in a great place.
Right.
Right. So getting
What's
in
the
that
full
context.
picture?
Yeah.
Contextual. I love that you brought that up because I think that translates to almost every area of life, but one, and this is different than research, but as it relates to art,
Yeah.
One of my favorite museums is the Isabella Gardner Museum.
Yeah.
In
So
Boston.
my daughter went to Mass Art.
Okay, yeah.
So-
So, and I think the reason I loved it so much was because the art was presented contextually.
Yes.
And it makes it feel immersive, and it makes it feel like, wow, this is the way the art should be shown, and I have a different appreciation.
Yeah, that is such an so my daughter's an artist, and I
Okay.
really was not an art person until she started down that path, right?
Right.
And so we would go to the museums, and we always get to the contemporary art museum, the one where it's like the big black thing on the wall,
Oh, yeah.
whatever, the big red square. And of course she was a teenager at that point. So I mean we had a good relationship, but still the kind of teenager, like, you're asking me dumb questions, right?
Right.
And one day we were down at the Atlanta, the High Museum,
Okay.
and we were in the contemporary art section. And I was like, I seriously want to understand why anyone thinks this big red square on the wall is art. And she's like, Dad. I'm like, no, I need you to explain this to me.
Yes.
Right? Like, tell me why.
Yes.
I'm not being flip. I may or may not have said a couple times, I think I could have made this,
Yeah.
And I can't draw a straight line with a ruler, right?
Right.
And her answer to me was, this is not being represented in the context by which the artist expected it to be represented. It's in this white box,
Yes.
and it probably was meant to be hung somewhere else and in
Yeah.
some other way. And that answer completely resonated with me. It's like, okay, got it, right? That makes
Absolutely.
complete sense.
And I mean, the fact that she had that insight, especially as a teenager, just shows, okay, yeah, she knows what she's doing. But I have actually talked to photographers. I was just in Charleston, and there's a studio down there, and there's actually gallery designers.
Yeah.
And that's part of, research, and we say user experience, but I believe like event planning, making an invitation, welcoming someone into your home, you're an experienced designer. And so how can you do that contextually to make people, you can't make them feel something, but to provide the best setting for them to feel what you're trying to evoke.
But we know also, the best brands make you feel something.
100%.
You could be dropped into the middle of a Target and not see the logos, and be dropped into the middle of a Walmart and not see the logo, and you would know which one you were in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Period. Just because that's all about all the stuff, the intangibles
Yeah.
that make up the brand.
Something as little as font.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this makes me feel a certain way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Scared.
yeah, I agree.
Warm and fuzzy.
Yeah.
Okay, so because I did promise it during the break, let's talk about my least favorite research technique.
Okay, focus groups.
How'd you guess?
No
Okay.
idea.
So focus groups. So focus groups is the thing that a lot of companies go to begin with. And the reason that I don't like focus groups is that when you do focus groups, it's typically, they want a lot of people to tell them something quickly. And so companies will say, oh, let's do a focus group, and we'll put 8-ish people in a room together. You really should only have 6, because 4 will talk to you, 2 will hang out and do nothing, and it's hard to get them in. And when you have 8, you just pay them to show up, right? The problem with focus groups is that they will take demographic information and put those people in a room. So they'll say, oh, this is, females or males, certain age, certain income, but they don't know the personas of the people in the room. And so they're getting these mixed answers, and they think the focus group is, crap, or the facilitator doesn't know what they're doing. Focus groups are good if you know the personas, because instead of putting demographics in the room, put people who think alike in the room. And no one ever takes the time to do the qualitative work to then build solid focus groups.
Yeah, I think too.
My first problem.
Okay,
with
go. First one.
Then my second one, and then I'll shut up.
Okay, second.
My second one is then customers like to change the protocol between focus groups. So they ask a set of questions in one, and then they change the questions, and you don't have any comparative.
Yeah, I mean, I guess their theory with that is
Just get all
A/B
fired
testing,
up.
but that it doesn't
Doesn't
really
work that
resonate,
way.
right?
I'd rather hear what I tell people is I'd rather hear 6 individuals tell me something individually than 6 people in a room tell me something.
And I think both have merit, but again, if you have the personas outlined, and the reason I say this is because sometimes people aren't comfortable sharing information if they feel alone.
Right.
And when you're in a group setting, it's that affirmation. It's, oh, you also struggle with mental health, and I can talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think in certain situations, having the support of the community, that there can be positive peer pressure that encourages people to share differently than they might one-on-one, because again, maybe they feel judged.
Right.
But to your point as well, that can skew, because people will say, oh, well, they didn't bring this up, so I'm not bringing that up because I don't want to be viewed as weird or whatever.
Right. And a big mistake I see made in focus groups too is going around the room and asking people what their profession is.
Yeah.
Because if you've got like a doctor in the room, and then there's someone who's a lay person, and what there's a natural hierarchy.
Right.
And they're like, oh, she's a doctor, and she knows that better than I do, so I'm not going to answer the question. She's smarter than I am.
Yeah, and just immediately shut yourself down.
Yeah.
Okay, I have no value to add.
So there's so much in that's like important. And my problem with focus groups is where they're typically put in the process. So focus groups may be something that companies try to do to circumvent doing, like you're doing 100 one-on-one interviews.
Right.
Literally 100. She's talking to
Literally.
100 people one-on-one over the course of, a couple weeks. No big deal.
No big deal.
She hasn't slept, if you can tell. But hearing from them versus you could have done it faster if you'd taken 100 and said, let's do 10-person focus groups. They could have been done, but you wouldn't have heard from most of those people. You wouldn't individually know and really if you do like a 1 or 1.5 hour focus group, you got 10 people in the room, you're only going to hear from that person for like 5 or 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Because everybody's using equal time.
True.
Or if I'm interviewing someone individually, I'm there for the hour to hour and a half. Like, I'm all yours. Tell me everything, right?
The floor is yours.
The floor is yours.
Yeah.
So putting focus groups at the right point, qualitative one-on-one is really important at the beginning, focus groups, and then maybe surveys. And that's often the order. And then surveys may drive you back to qualitative. So it's this phased kind of combination.
Absolutely. It's very cyclical, and depending on this is a constant discussion in my home, but I'm not a linear thinker. I think very circularly, just okay, where does that lie in this process? And I think that didn't work in a lot of things I've done, but in research I think it does, because you're not going to approach every outcome the same.
Right.
So having the ability to shift and pivot from focus group here, survey here, to, oh, let's flip that, and how could that be advantageous, I think is important.
Yeah, and taking, and I used to call it beautiful mind. It's like, seeing all the patterns, right?
Yes.
Then someone reminded me he was crazy. So now I use The Accountant. Have you seen that?
That's actually in my top 5 favorite movies.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
I
he
love that
looks
movie.
at all the numbers and puts them up. He wasn't crazy. He just happened to be an assassin.
Yes.
So there you go, right?
Yeah.
But that kind of like taking disorganized and sort of loose information and figuring out what the structure is to it.
Yes.
And when you see the pattern, you're like, it's just like,
it's a picture, and
it's amazing.
so clear. Yeah.
Love it. So anyway, so in the few minutes that we have, like, I've talked a lot. So tell me some things what are some of the things that you would tell people if they're starting to go down a research project to understand their customers better?
I would say, first of all, understand that whatever your goal is going in, it will likely change coming out.
100%.
So maybe your intent is to understand, do they like this button here? And the results are, they don't like the way that the submenu is nested. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's all right. We wouldn't have expected to even ask them that, but that's what came out. So first of all, be be comfortable with the insights not aligning with the initial goal of your research, because that's kind of the beauty of it, is things will be unveiled that you wouldn't even have thought to look into. Secondly, I would say talk to your people. I mean, research doesn't have to be formal. It can be as simple as like we're doing here. We're just having a conversation peer to peer, and why not do that on a regular basis? Like put your feelers out, understand where your people are coming from. And I think the more touch points people have, and what I mean that to be is maybe there is a president of a company, the more often they can interact with subordinates, even if it's just, how's your day? How was it parking today? Like, just, it looks like you're wearing a sweater. Yeah. Is it cold in the building? Just random questions that day in and day out will add up to, oh, maybe we need to have employee parking, or maybe we need to adjust the temperature at this time of day. Right. Just if you keep your ears open and just keep it conversational, then you'll have a lot more insight and you don't need to hire a big firm. Yeah. Because maybe that's not the goal. So I think just keeping that open dialogue is important. Yeah.
So a piece of work that I did sort of as I sold the last business was around operations, and people would always ask me what was the most dangerous thing in a leader, and they thought I was going to, what my answer was, if they were unaware. If they're unaware, like, the people who kind of walk through life with blinders and they're not paying attention to the stuff around them. Yeah. And you've got to be aware of all those things, because those are things that are impacting your goals and your objectives. I agree. It's being that naturally curious.
Yeah, right? And that's, so I guess my last point on research, I would say, is watch Ted Lasso. This is not an ad, not sponsored, but rather, and this comes from other things I have learned too, but if you feel yourself being defensive, or, for example, you just implemented this amazing program, why don't they respond? What's wrong with them? Ask. Get curious. Like, what's happening where this isn't resonating? So I think our tendency is to be defensive because of all the input and work we've put in. But if we can flip that and rather just get curious, then we can allow ourselves to have so much more knowledge and insight.
I love beautiful, terrible failures.
Yeah.
You learn way more from it, right? As long as you fail forward. So Ted Lasso. So, I've watched Ted Lasso. Okay, so I haven't watched all of it, so maybe I'm not there yet. But he strikes me as aware, unaware.
I would say that's fair. Absolutely.
Because in some situations he's not aware of what he's, and sometimes he is.
Yeah. And I think that's why you have to have a good team. Because you can't always see and feel everything, but if you can augment your skill set in your team, then you can be all-seeing.
Yeah, because in an unaware way, it's almost like he doesn't know people kind of hate him.
Right.
Right, but in an aware way, he'll do things that you're like, oh, wow, that was unexpected. Yeah. Right, and he did it because of the surroundings. So he's an interesting character.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'll have to spend some more time watching that show then.
I recommend it.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with me. It was so much
great.
fun. I always love having Ligers on the show. It's great.
It was great chatting.
Yeah, thanks. So
thank you.
You've been listening to The Claw, which is the marketing podcast for C-suite executives. I'm Eric Holtzclaw, Chief Strategist at Liger Partners. I've been talking today with Jojo Bowling. She is a true Liger. She sits on two sides of our business, both the design and user experience. Tune in next time, and we'll have another chat about something that will be important to you and your marketing objectives.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Claw podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, rate and review this podcast. And if you or someone you know wants to make an appearance on this show, email us at yourbestie@ligerpartners.com.